Hello again, and we hope that you had a nice time during the break and you were also enjoying the music during the lunch break time. And after we have talked about challenges and chances concerning the implementation of Resolution 1325, we have listened to wonderful contributions from the participants of the panel. We now come back to do some kind of a trip through the region. We have participants here who can give further or shed further light on the Arab region and give us some understanding of what can be done in the implementation of this decision concerning women and their participation in the peace and security processes in the region. Half of the wars in the world are occurring in this region, but this region wants, of course, to live in peace after all these challenges it has been facing. And this morning, the women said that they are with security and peace. We are together with Dr. Maria Al-Abd, Executive Director of Women Now for Development in Syria. She will talk to us for about 5 minutes about participation of women in Syria. Welcome, Dr. Maria, please. Thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you for the idea that we can also take part. Of course, our life is very much connected to the experience of our friends in Iraq. And of course, we have this social war also in our countries, and we have so many common problems. And when we talk about the situation of women in fighting for peace in Syria, of course, we also follow this peace and security agenda for women. Of course, we also see what is the position of women. We have so many joint and common interests, and we see that women and men in Syria have suffered a lot since 2011 in the fight for democracy and freedom and fighting corruption. And in Syria, we had the dream, different dreams. That means freedom and democracy. And the participation of women in the roads, in the streets, is an indication of the big role women play, and that they have really entered the area of the fight for their future and taking part in the popular revolution. They play a very wide role in the different levels in fighting the regime and its supporters. And women have their roles, the small as the background, but I think that we have also the impression now that many women in Syria are now always thinking of the future, of building up a future for them and for their people. And we have, of course, always demands for a better life of girls and the women, of the different components of the society. Peace, of course, is the most most critical, and this is also our best weapon. If we want societies, we want the just and fair societies in Syria. That means also fair access to all parts of the society, education, and so on, and especially also that we want to fight against corruption, and here the problems begin, because and I would like to talk about this. After 10 years of the conflict in Syria, it is unfortunately a fact that in general, and unfortunately, the demands of the revolution have not been realized. The fighting continues, and corruption continues, and crime continues to be committed, and even there we have militias still active in the country, and women have done something. We have women centers, and we do also show resistance against radical forces, and we do not think of this peace for peace, but this means we want a daily change in the situation of women, and we learn in this for the future in Syria. And women also try to take part in the daily activities. We have this today's Syrian agenda, especially in the rural areas. We are working for justice and transitional justice, and for security, and this with the broad participation of women. And of course, women want to take part on a fair basis and equitable basis, and in order to form a new society. So the situation of women is very difficult and harsh currently, and it is difficult to work for justice, and also for the punishment of perpetrators and so on. And we are always, people speak about the society as a whole, but often it is overlooked that this justice must be for everybody, and peace can be achieved only with the participation of women. And we have to go back to the roots of the problems, and this especially concerning women. And the women should really work on the reasons for the bad situation, and because women are especially suffering from the situation in the society, we have to work on the concepts, on old concepts about the role of women, in order to change them. Sorry, I don't understand. But it's now there's now some kind of a somebody is interfering. I am sorry for this problem. Just a minute, Dr. Maria. These things, of course, happen on internet, online conferences. Please go ahead, Dr. Maria. Thank you very much. I also wanted about the concept of justice for women. It is correct. It is very diverse, and women, of course. Oh, sorry, I don't I hear myself, sorry. We go back to the reasons of this conflict, to the basic reasons. That means this is justice, justice to be applied on an everyday basis. And that especially women are not marginalized, and that women are included in the build-up of a new future of freedom in Syria. And we really call for the change of the current situation in Syria. 100,000 people are still in the hands of the regime. Of course, we work on the concepts of equitability and of justice, and we work on the production of knowledge also, and the dissemination of knowledge, and the women are taking part, and the states of the states of the world, and the peoples of the world will understand much for Syria if they understand the different aspects in our society. And we also, of course, we don't want that there's any influence. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution, Dr. Maria. Now let us go to Jordan, and we listen to Dr. Salman Mintz. Dr. Salman Mintz is the Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women's Affairs, and she speaks about the role of women in the fight for peace in Jordan, and what are the challenges and the achievements throughout the past 20 years. Please.
It's been previously recorded. We hope to have Dr. Salma with us later on for taking questions, but now we have her recorded speech. First of all, I'd like to thank El Parlament and the GIZ for having organized this conference on women, peace and security. Jordan was one of the first countries worldwide which has been contributing in peacekeeping missions. And also women have been taking part for a number of years now from Jordan in UN peacekeeping missions, because we have given a huge importance to women in peace building, which has supported in implementing the resolution on the national level. This plan was implemented by the highest will of the Jordanian government and at the highest levels on all parts of the kingdom. And this is in this alliance, building the coalition for this plan. All parties of society and the government have been cooperating, and we have also financial means have been earmarked for this, which is also a reconfirmation of the Jordanian government as to its will to implement this plan, where we were the first 5 countries in the world who set up a common fund to finance the implementation of these plans. So since 2015, we have now the latest plan, and from it derived also the Higher Commission, the National Commission for Women's Affairs, which is also proof of the success of the national plan. On a general level, in the last 2 years, we've achieved a lot of things regarding the participation in official positions and also in military positions for women, and also in the social viewpoints, and also the training of and the development of methodology and curricula to further on bring them to the level of the attention of decision makers, This is one of the most important achievements that have been reached in Jordan. Also, fighting extremism, the role of women in fighting extremism. There is a national observatory, and the civil society in Jordan contributes to creating an awareness of women and the awareness for the role of women in local society. We have also networked with the National Coalition for Security and Youth, which has been set up according to an international agreement, and we've been networking with this coalition in implementing and supporting and confirming their national security agenda and also fighting hatred. And also the civil society was very influential in implementing this plan, also fighting violence against women and providing services in this regard, and also played an enormous role on the local level in responding to local needs when facing the coronavirus pandemic. And also in helping build the capacities of organizations and institutions. We have set up a comprehensive program working on gender issues. We're going to keep going in this regard over the coming years. We have already achieved a great deal, and I'm going to conclude by saying that we have a communication strategy and an outreach strategy on the national level, which helped us make this agenda more well known and raise awareness and the popular interest in this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your interference. But, sorry, I have no voice. Now we go to Mrs. Fayrouz Ahmed al-Jaradi, lawyer and human rights activist from Yemen, and she will speak to us about the demands of women in the safeguarding of peace in Yemen. Please, Mrs. Fayrouz.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you very much. Fayrouz, the floor is yours, please. I'm speaking to you from Yemen. Fayrouz Ahmed al-Jaradi, lawyer and human rights activist. I'm going to start from the last of the dreams which we were wishing to achieve in Yemen from the National Dialogue Conference, where women where only 3% were women. And then we had the Constitution drafting committee, so there was only one woman between 13 men, but at least that was a good start for the women in Yemen so that they can reach positions of decision-making and have an impact. Then we had internal conflicts between the different political factions. Also the aggression that happened, the attack on Yemen, which concerned, of course, all of Yemen and particularly women, and which has been reflecting and impacting on women particularly, and which has created a great lapse back for Yemeni women, where there are many political factions which consider that women are have no part in the war, and as a result they should not play a role in peace building. So there was only one woman who was incorporated in the delegation for the peace building and negotiations. Regarding the implementation of Resolution 1325, after 2 decades, we are still speaking about women, peace and security, and at least for women in Yemen, the situation is still quite dire. We then not incorporated in all kinds of legislations, even not in the constitution. We have had some very nice achievements, where 30%, which has been accredited and been confirmed by Yemen, a new legislation. But since the results of the national dialogue have not been forthcoming, it's been becoming very difficult for women to make have her voice heard individually. because it's been considered that the war is more pressing and this is a more pressing issue than the women's cause. I'm considering that this is not only women's needs, but it's the needs of the whole of the society. So, for example, women are not allowed to give to testify in court sometimes. So many constitutional texts. I am not going to go into much more detail about them. So it's not only about political issue, but it's also the possibility of raising to post. I'd say that the resolution 1325 would need more proactive mechanisms to implement it, to force also countries to respect it. Lately, we had a national plan in the south, but which has not been started to being implemented. So we have two governments now, and so we only have one plan, and they have still not taken it seriously enough. Regarding the fighting against violence against women, we have a new legislation, a new law which has been passed, but it has not been implemented yet. So we have these two separate governments, and the other government does not respect any legislation passed by the parliament in the other part, and and vice versa. And that's why the peace negotiations are taking predominance over everything else that is happening, also regarding women's legislations and the society as a whole. And the women are still being kept away and marginalized in the efforts to strive for peace. The UN efforts should also enforce all political factions and participating parties to include women and women's issues in their agenda. We have many prominent women. We have very educated women, we have students, we have lawyers, we have very strong women. So it's not acceptable that women's voice is not going to be heard in the peace talks and the negotiations. We have very high-ranking women who used to be even in a decorative function ministry post, and they used to be in decision-making functions. So there should be at least a certain amount of representation, and which has so far been only there to satisfy foreign powers. And I think lastly, we need efficient mechanisms to implement Resolution 1325 about women, peace and security, and the role of women in bringing about peace and security. I think women would have their voices have to be heard, particularly in a situation where women are suffering much more than men. Men are doing, of course, their share in war, but also the women are bearing the responsibility inside the house, and particularly those who are not educated in villages and cities. And that's why the voices of women should be heard, which some Yemeni women have been trying to do and have been trying to make their voices heard in local and regional international organizations. And I think even though it's very difficult to end the war, it would be very important to have peace be brought about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for elaborating on the situation in Yemen. And of course, this is very interesting. We are very curious about this. And perhaps because of COVID, the situation is deteriorating now. And but so it is more important that you stay with us now. We have, of course, some questions then, and I would like to ask you these questions about to the women who are going to speak here. And now we listen to Mrs. Mohsen Hassan, founder and executive director of Nazara for Feminist Studies in Egypt. And we'd like to hear from you and that you shed a light on the situation in your countries. Please, Mrs. Mohsen. There are some delay from your side. Just a minute. I'm Mohsen Hassan from Egypt. I'm a founder. Sorry. So now, please start. We are with you. I'm the founder of the Nazara Feminist Studies, and we are happy to take part in this meeting here. The situation in Egypt, I would like to talk about. Do you listen? Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Currently, there's no problem. Please go ahead. We hear you. Okay, يعني عندنا بعض we have some technical problems here. We have a recording from Susan Zakzak, a writer and women's rights activist in Syria. From Syria, we will listen to her contribution and how this has been recorded also, and we'll get it on the internet. Please. Susan. Sorry, I don't hear anything. Das ist nur der It was heavy fighting because the legal protection is not existing in Syria. Even before the conflict, it was women were not protected from violence against women. And what we are now facing is a delay in the implementation of the resolution 1325. First of all, we have to say that the government has been doing something for the National Action Plan concerning the implementation of the rights of women. And this, of course, is also connected to the protection of women from the armed conflict. And I would like to talk about the challenges for women and how the different conflicting parties deal with this situation, and that there is a great lack of protection for women. And certainly, how's the situation for the refugees and for the IDPs in Syria and outside, and especially that there are no national plans for the implementation of this resolution 1324. And fourthly, there is a weakness in the support for activists who are fighting against violation of its different forms. For example, the representative of the Secretary General for Women said that there unfortunately is there's no role of the state for the protection of women, and especially also to protect surviving women who survived the conflict and need now relief. And we have been able to take part in activities of 2020, and so we were able to come close to the Syrian negotiation table, and in order to include also the topic of women in these negotiations. And within the mechanism of this council, the gender topic was also addressed, and especially in order to activate the Syrian society to form a new constitution which is just for women and men and for all ethno and religious groups of the country. And of course, now, currently, I will talk about two initiatives. First of all, the Women Peace Council. This is a group of ladies who are present in different places, and during this, in the course of these meetings, they discuss all aspects that are important for Syrian women. This might be political or economic or social, especially social affairs, and especially also how to fight COVID-19. And this is a wide, all-embracing discussion, and there are other meetings, and these women also inform themselves about the current developments in the country. There is an exchange between this Women's Council and the Syrian ladies in the different parts of the country. And secondly, there is the League of Syrian Women, which also has formed a group of women and also men who are expressing their ideas about the principles of the constitution, of the new constitution. And there's a group also which is working on forming a constitutional committee. That means try to send representatives to this committee for the writing of the new constitution in order to take part in the discussions about which take part in this committee. And these principles which are put forward during the discussion, these principles addressed in the discussion, they are a principle of democracy, the separation of the state powers, and also fighting violence against women or other other forms of violence. Thank you very much for you all, and I wish all success to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your recorded intervention from Ms. Sausan Zakzak. Unfortunately, Sausan could not join us through the internet connection, but we're going to collect some questions which we're going to address to Maria and Feroz, which are here with us now via internet connection. We would like to ask you, Feroz, in the thorny situation in Yemen, the COVID-19 pandemic also increases the issue of violence against women. Despite the still ongoing war and also the fight against domestic violence and violence against women in general, What are now the recent developments on the ground in Yemen regarding this issue? Regarding COVID-19, in the north here, in Sana'a particularly, we have taken preventive measures to protect women. Not such measures as has been taken in other countries, as far as we conclude from the social media channels. Fortunately, we have not had that many cases recently. So in the beginning of the first wave, we had some number of cases, but fortunately now it's not too bad. Now women's position is stronger. Women are very far removed from decision-making positions. Regarding armed conflicts, which are being led by men, women have nothing to do with that. Women's work is limited in NGOs to work there, but politicized organizations in the south or in the north, they are very much men's monopoly. Women do have no weight there. Women only work on emergency relief, on changes in laws, such things. Relatively simple things, so their role is relatively limited. So we cannot say that women play an important role at this current point of time. So the condition has concerned us much more women than men, even though it has an impact on all of society. So women suffer from the consequences of COVID-19 more than men. Thank you very much. We'd like to go back to Mohsen Hassan, who has joined us again to speak to us. Unfortunately, these technical issues happen, and since we are talking about COVID-19 and the pandemic, Dr. Maria, may you give us also a description of this issue in the current situation in Syria, for example? Please, but we can. Oh, sorry. Yes, now you can hear you. Of course, there's a huge confluence of what is happening due to the pandemic and what is happening inside Syria anyway, which has a huge impact. So there's 10 million people. Internally displaced people. So people have been fleeing their homes, and most of them are still somewhere else in Syria. And there has been a focused targeting of hospitals, particularly by the Syrian regimes. The infrastructure in certain areas, such as Iblis, is incapable of dealing with the pandemic and confronting the pandemic, which led to a stepping up of the danger posed and the threat posed by the pandemic. And there is no program as of this very day due to the fully ongoing armed conflict. So there are entire areas which have absolutely no access to any kind of services except through humanitarian assistance. These organizations have undertaken awareness-raising campaigns, and particularly addressing women regarding the pandemic, but they have only had limited impact, mainly on the girls. And the sanitary situation led to the also in stepping up of the general situation, because women and girls can no longer go to school. There's also suicides happening by women due to this. And we have also seen on the side of the Syrian regime that they were mainly dealing with the crisis from a security point of view. which has led to a really scary situation nowadays in Syria. We have even no clarity about the actual figures of cases. When we speak today, when we want to talk about the measure of impact on women, we have no means of measuring that. In the areas where the government is present, there's nothing being done for the protection of women at all anyways, from societal violence. In the areas which are under other controls, well, there's basically no rule of law and there's no laws. So there is no means of protecting women at all.
Thank you for your contribution to this subject. And we go again to Mohsen and try again to listen to her. Please, Mohsen. I'll take some second time, try a second time. Perhaps again, it is difficult to me. I think you have asked about this situation and about concerning the implementation of Resolution 1325 in Egypt. Of course, in comparison with other countries like Yemen and Syria, we are in another situation. I think that, sorry, connection is broken. Concerning the peace, peace is always connected with violence, and of course it is gender-based violence, and of course this also includes genital mutilation of girls and so on, and of course this is due to a patriarchal thinking in the society and of a backward attitude to women. And there's a deep-rooted question, how we go on, go ahead in the society. How does society deal with this? Of course, the problems which we have in here, they will also have in other countries. And of course, there are disputes about how to deal with this. And also this question why Egypt has not yet reached a clear position. Of course, there are still these faults and these deficits. And what happens in the framework, in this framework also poses the question why it is against to the detriment of women, first of all. And of course, we also need the support from other countries in dealing this, especially when we are fighting against violence and for a peace. And of course, to build up a mechanism to this, it means national activities, efficient national activities to achieve realistic goals. And of course, in Egypt, we have a national strategy. And these mechanisms, of course, they need political will to be implemented, to give women the chance to be represented at the different levels. And of course, there are initiatives, but so far they are not very useful. Of course, there are also different forms of such a strategy, and the question is how is it possible to bring these forms together? I think, again, we have voice disturbances. Please continue.
دايما بيبقى عندنا التشكك كده كنسويات ان احنا نقول احنا لا
there is a committee which says we do not only speak about the women, but we speak about the society in general. When we talk about violence, gender-based violence, then it is important that all actors in the society are included and involved in order to overcome violence and these the problems related to it. And in Egypt, as well as in other countries, we have this marginalization, and we have, on the other hand, also a crime against women. And of course, we need a comprehensive, just and fair dealing with these problems. About what happens in this society. Thank you. Thank you, Mohsen. Please stay with us. Perhaps we can ask you some questions, and the voice will become clearer, and we can repair the voice problems. I would like to ask Dr. Maria. My question about perhaps the situation is, of course, devastating. What do you have any success or anything which can be said that is positive concerning the situation of women in Syria? Dr. Maria, please, it's your turn. Perhaps it's mute. You have taken on mute. Now we are hearing you. We are hearing you. Now we've got your voice. Please, yes, you can speak. No doubt that there are positive steps, there are everyday steps, there are women initiatives all over Syria, and in education, in economic empowerment. This also is regards to the daily work. On a daily basis, women try to improve their situation, and also to find safe places for women remote from any events and which are affecting women. And of course, in the daily activity and together with the women on the basis of a year program, of an annual program, there are many steps taken, and women also try to do first theoretical studies and then to transfer them into practical work as far as possible, and for example, also the self-assistance of women. These are little daily tools, and in the end, these daily activities will become bigger for building the future of Syria. For example, initiatives for justice and for participation. These are initiatives for political participation and inclusion. And on the other hand, it is very important what is happening really on the grassroots, at the grassroots level in Syria. And there's a group, for example, of women from Nazara, which have prepared gifts and presents for children who live in camps. And also this is also part of the Syrian revolution to develop the awareness for democracy and for participation. And women also in all areas of Syria, they work for fight for their rights and for the build-up of a better future for all groups of the society. Ferouz, in the Yemeni situation, of course, there are also cultural and social challenges, especially now in the wartime situation. Please, is there any progress in the life of women, any relief for the sufferings of women? Is there anything you can refer to as an achievement? These challenges and in the cultural and social sectors in the Yemeni society, and perhaps this also brings me to the question which is connected to the situation of the tribes and the tribal society. What is the role of women in this, negatively or positively, in Yemen?
Is the question only relating to religious and tribal institutions and organizations? Well, if there are other institutions, of course, which could play a role in further implementing these things, well, I mean, we would be ready to listen to this. Me, as a lawyer, I'm working particularly on the legal side and the law side. And I think that particularly the tribes and the different religious factions, which are also rampant in the parties, there were nothing positive for women. There was something negative for women. If there is something positive in this, then it is that they were trying to create obstacles on the way of creating better laws and legislations for women. So I don't think that they play a positive role in a big way, even if they play a minor role. So if, for example, in the Friday sermons in the mosques, they say something against women's role and women's empowerment that has a big role to play in a society such as Yemen. For me, I'd say when we try to strive for a better legal situation, then that can also have an impact on these issues and can have a positive influence. So a rule of law is going to be implemented on everyone, and it's going to be valid for everyone, and that as such can foster the status of women. So it's not only about discriminations, what we're talking about. It's about the role of religious leaders And so they're only usually being held responsible to their master and their lord. So sometimes they are not bound by the law, which is the case in Yemen here. Women have their voice, we cannot negate it, and the religious leaders have their voices and the tribal institutions, but it's usually directed against women. As a comment to this, I was not trying to say that these institutions are going to play a role and that they're going to create pressure on these rule of law, because we know that usually rule of law should be dominant. But in Arab countries, we are aware of the fact that government levels and other authorities are strongly influenced and impacted by these religious and tribal leaders. So are there any initiatives to try to get them on board so they become promoters of the rule of law? Are there such initiatives that they are proactive in creating an awareness in society to protect the rights of women or gender questions? As initiatives, I think, as far as I know, there are not that many, particularly in the area where I live around Sana'a here. Sorry, there's an enormous backlash and an enormous echo. So we could even try to convince them on the religious side, saying that even there's nothing in Islam saying that women should be oppressed. And then we should try to discuss with them on the level of Islamic legislation. So there are many studies proving that. And sorry, I can't hear it. There's a loud echo. When they discuss it, many of those discussing are convinced that it is the contrary in Islam, and that an empowerment of women goes against our Islamic traditions. But the tribal and the patriarchic thought structures, even if they're at least convinced about it, even if they do not implement something, so that it doesn't play a positive role for advancing the status of women. You could answer, but there are some questions we're still taking on regarding Egypt. Egypt, where let's say Egypt is the mother of the world, with this state, with its enormous amount of people in the population, and also its different traditions in different regions in Egypt, which creates a challenge for changing traditions and culture. There's also a question. It's considered almost revolutionary to challenge the traditional role of women, particularly in areas such as Upper Egypt. So does it have an impact on the legislative level due to the big women's movement on the issue of sexual harassment? In such a big society such as Egypt, how do you consider that there's answers to these questions?
Thank you very much. That's a good question. And in fact, the situation concerning violence against the women is still grave. We are not only different in the different areas, but there's also different problems in the different areas, and there's even additional problems. Do you hear me now? Yes, now we're hearing you. We are hearing. Please go ahead. And the matter of violence, we have it is dealt with in the society by political institutions and so on. And of course, they take part in dealing with this. And there's, for example, but in general, we have a patriarchal structure of the society, and this is not different between the different areas. And I think there's a lot of things we have to understand. We have to understand that men are still dominating the area of legislation, and we have different reactions also when this subject is addressed, and we have different groups from the state and Islamic groups within the power and without the state power, and they are also different in this context of their knowledge about this, and also so this subject is not on the front line of discussions. And recently in Egypt, of course, women have also raised this question, and of course the issue is how to deal with these problems, and at least in a simple way. And violence in Egypt, especially in general against women, is a general Egyptian problem, and of course this affects ourselves, and in the reality it is a grave problem. Of course, this is damaging, and of course, there are also complaints against this raised to the authorities. And this is discussed in at the cultural and the social, economic levels, and in the different strata of the society. And it appears that violence is existing, and it is always a question of the relation of power between women and men. And of course, we are keen to achieve some legal developments in this field, and also that plans to address this problem are worked out. And it is also there are also attempts to bring this subject to the general level of the general discussion, especially also to advocate the legislation, the introduction of a legislation in order to make it a general subject, the violence against women for Egypt. Especially also by publishing the statements of women who have survived this, of victims of violence, to make it also a topic in the political discussions, and in order to find the solutions for this. Thank you, Mohsen. Dr. Maria, The situation in Syria, as this perhaps also in Libya, in Yemen, and other countries which have been experiencing long conflicts. There's a group of challenges also in countries like Egypt, throughout the area. Through your work as activists and at the regional level, not only in Syria, do you think that women in the region in general, perhaps the world thinks this is one homogeneous area, but we know that there are differences in the situation there, but there are also common denominators. Do women when they play a role in achieving security and peace in the area, do they also have any coordination throughout the region? Do you see any positive development in this context? And are there regional chances, cooperation and collaboration, perhaps also with men in the region? Thank you very much for this question. I think, as you said, we are in one region. Do you hear me? The voice is a bit weak, but we hear you. As you said, of course, there are differences in the context in our countries. In Syrian, we have 4 or 5 different contexts. But concerning coordination, there's a lack, but there's also solidarity and with, for example, also ladies from Egypt, fighting against the dictatorship, and we always benefit from our experiences, and there's a high level solidarity about what is developing in the area in Lebanon or in Syria, rights for women in Lebanon and so on. And so before the pandemic, especially Iraq and Lebanon, we as Syrian women have also had good contacts and coordination, and we had been suffering from dictatorships that were working together. When people were in solidarity with each other, and we see this on a personal basis. Also, the fighters and defenders of human rights. There's the exchange of experience. This is very important for us.
Fairuz, I'd like to ask you, what do you expect from the other Arabs present here and the Arab women? So maybe even our language is quite patriarchal in some terms. What do Yemeni women expect, such as other women in areas of conflict, from other women in the region? For example, what are your wishes for this coordination or the lessons to be learned from other movements? Yemeni women, they expect networking from other Arab women in the region. But so they different levels, but I think it's everywhere a little bit the same situation. I think the situation of women in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, in Egypt, in Tunisia is somehow still similar, even if we see in certain places huge changes and improvements in the legislative situation. In general, in the Arab world, the view of women is that they are somehow less valuable than men. So I think that networking between Yemeni women and Iraqi women, for example, is extremely important. We have certain experiences, for example, laws in certain Arabic countries which have become very good for women. In Saudi Arabia, we have lately seen a surge of 9 changes to important laws considering the status of women. So I think if we have a networking happening between Yemeni women and other Arab women, I think the legislative situation is going to change. Me, as a lawyer, I think that the start of the change should be brought about by the change of laws, be it on the level of the constitution, laws, or other legislative texts. Even if men still have a patriarchal way of thinking, but law is binding for everyone, so nobody can ignore it. So even if we still live under the impact of conflicts and wars, we still have laws, even laws issued by illegal authorities, also, so to speak. But we need freedom, and we need the application of laws who guarantee us the justice and freedom and provide us with a safe space to live in. So that should be part of the battle of women so they can gain their place in societies. So I really wish to see a serious networking and the interconnection with women from Iraq and other places in the Arab world. I don't think it's not very far away. When I'm listening to Dr. Maria from Syria, I feel like it's almost the same as what I experience here as a woman in Yemen. The same thing applies to Egypt. I've been to Egypt, and even though it's a huge society, but it's not that much difference, even though the legal situation might be a lot better than what is in Yemen. But still, the way of thinking is the same. So we really need networking to advance our cause, even though men are considered an essential partner in this, but it's our cause, so it's a societal cause. So the networking is extremely important. Thank you very much for this important question. Can I add something here? There are challenges on the Egyptian level. The most important issues of these challenges faced by the NGO is the implementation of the laws, you see. But how far do you think that civil society organizations are also trying, on the background of the challenges they face, try to bring about change and try to advance the participation of women, push it forward in Egypt? In fact, we are undergoing now really difficult historical situation regarding the cause of women. The sound quality is very bad, I'm sorry. The issue that has been the case for a number of years now, it's also problematic, which have to do with the essential things of life, resources, the defamation, which has impact on all of us. Be it, which is also an impact on the developmental level and also on the political level. I'd like to say that the Egyptian women's movement, well, I wouldn't particularly call it successful in that sense. but there are tools. But I may say that over the past decade, we've been making big advances in our struggle, even though we are going to build upon that with new generations, putting new issues on the agenda, and which are going to make continuously this issue present in different parts of the society. But on the other side, sorry, I can't hear it properly. So there are new generations coming up, young girls, initiatives launched by them in the last 4 years, which are completely different from the traditional kinds of organizations, such as our organization, for example. For example, me personally, I'm happy that I find other girls and young women thinking alike. So we've used this issue because I think that the Egyptian feminist movement has been able to build and capitalize on. So we not only build upon 1 or 2, 3 organizations, but it's really an entire movement. We have an impetus. We have some energy that's different. That's different in the way that each group can benefit and impact its local environment. We still haven't come up with a lot because we have not a huge amount of societal organizations. So the public space available to this is not very big. But still, that I think that the challenge in Egypt is maybe still big and is increasing daily. I'd like to benefit from this opportunity that Salma is now with us online from Jordan. Hello, welcome. Happy to have you here. We have listened to your recorded speech where you have been talking about the situation in Jordan and what Jordan is doing regarding the resolution 1325 and the role of women. You've spoken about something which is quite particular in the region. Women present as part of peacekeeping missions, which was a decision taken by the Jordanian authorities, but also challenges for women in Jordan similar to those in other Arab countries. So maybe you could give another input, and then I'm going to follow it up by another question. Thank you. So I joined you at 2 o'clock Jordanian time, so I'm not sure if I was late. So I think there is a difference in time zones, yes, maybe. But no worries, please. So at least I can join you now, even though if there's only limited time left. Maybe you can turn on the volume up?
Hello?
I was listening to my colleagues from Syria, Egypt and Yemen, and as they mentioned, in the end, at the end of the day, there might be a difference in legislations, but there are still common challenges we face as women. First of all, the issue, even the participation of women in this public decision-making is still a huge challenge. That was one of the most important elements in actually adopting 1325 and also facing the coronavirus pandemic, which has brought about and has consolidated many kinds of inequalities and their societal impacts in the times of the pandemics. They have reinforced what we knew to be present there. For example, the participation of women in decision-making processes, which is challenges we have been facing in Jordan from the start of the pandemic. We were not sitting at the tables where the decisions were being made to face the pandemic. So in the beginning, it was like just bear reaction instead of having a really huge impact on the decision-making institution. Violence against the women in Jordan is one of the first countries having set up an agency to protect women against this kind of thing in 1998 already. But still, violence is ongoing because there is still the patriarchal view of intersexual or intergender relations and the definition of masculinity and patriarchal values. So men feel when they're still very young, it's crystallized that they're entitled to harass women in public spaces or to exert violence against them in private. And there was a recent study by the Women's Committee of the United Nations where women suffer from violence more than men, even inside the families, because the very understanding of masculinity incorporates that men have to control everything. When these definitions and these ideas start to be shaken, then violence increases. So violence has increased enormously during the pandemic. In the past 2 weeks, we have had a youth challenge, but we still have the education. Women are very educated in Jordan, but now education institutions have mainly been closed down again. Even those, I mean, 78% of women actually reach secondary level exam, which is the highest level in all Arab countries. So in our countries where we're not suffering from acute conflict, it's very important to get more women into decision-making positions and also protect women from the refugees and marginalized areas from violence, which I tried to outline also in my recorded speech. There's something very important in Jordan, which is in our plan, is fighting extremism, also to reinforce the role of women in local societies, and also in fighting extremist thinking. I'm not only talking about the Western definition of extremist thinking, so meaning that it's violent extremist organization. No, in Jordan we're working on the idea of diversity and accepting the other, and facing ideas of hatred and hate speech, because, such as my colleague from Egypt mentioned, there's also an attempt to place women also in one stereotype. That's also some kind of hatred. In the past year, where we had a sit-in to protest against a woman losing her eye because she was attacked by her husband. So we are always facing the danger that anyone having gone crazy, a crazy man, because they've listened to her rhetoric on a social media channel, they might attack her. So we're not talking about only one definition which has been set by the Western world when it was defining the Islamist terrorism, but it's when we talk about fighting extremism, we talk about fostering a culture of diversity, which is in turn going to foster a culture of diversity, because we live in a society where we have an enormous diversity.
Salma, I'll come back to you to shed some more light on what you said, but I would like to ask Dr. Maria. Jordan and Lebanon are the host countries of a big number of refugees in the area, and Jordan, they always had refugees from Iraq, Palestine, and Syria now. and so on. And I would like to ask about the situation of female refugees, for example, from Syria. What is your opinion concerning the inclusion of these women on processes for peace and security, and how can they be included? Thank you for this question. Before I answer, I would also refer to what Fayrouz from Yemen said. She has very well described the situation of the women there concerning the situation concerning the support of women initiatives. And of course, we can together learn a lot about how to organize women. And in Syria, we have the Women's Counseling Council. It could also be in Yemen. And we could exchange our experience and our opinions, especially also the opinions of Syrian fighting women. This exchange of experience is very important, and it will be very positive also for our activities. And I also thank Dr. Mohsen for her position concerning, unfortunately, I can't say anything about Jordan. I don't have any experience. I just have experience from Lebanon and Turkey. There's a general problem. I think when we talk about refugees, we isolate, we separate the role of women from other things. We first of all see that they are refugees, that they are weak, that they are marginalized, living in a weak, in a precarious situation. And of course, nonetheless, there are very strong women among them, and although they live in very difficult conditions, and unfortunately, there's no legal framework for their activities. There's no legal definition for refugees, and so no legal basis for fighting sexual violence or so this legal framework is the most important tool for defending them from that. When we see Lebanese women, how they deal with this subject, how they work with the Syrian women, they organize demonstrations, and we have also participated with Lebanese women in demonstrations, be supported by the Lebanese movement. And we have also learned from Syrian, and that unfortunately the existence of Syria, there's nothing we can say. I know that it is now very complicated in Syria, but we think this is timely limited, and we learn also from these countries which are hosts of refugees. Thank you, Dr. Salma. You have taken part in connection with this topic. Dr. Maria, the Jordanian situation, the future of refugees throughout the years. And when we are talking about peace and security, social peace and security for everybody in developing countries or countries facing economic problems. And this is even this resolution 1325, it is for women, also for Jordanian women. Are there any things which are connected to this, especially concerning refugee women? Of course, in 2015, when we started, and me as the Secretary General of the National Women's Council, we had developed something. Even that time, in 2015, the national strategy for women was a strategy for Jordanian women. And of course, then we had to deal with the crisis in Syria. And I had hoped that women will be dealt with in general in Jordan, not only Jordanian women, and that in the meetings that all women can come together. And these strategies from 2000 and we have a plan for 2025, and both sides are working on doing something, developing something, especially also on the basis of this plan to take into account this existence of Syrian refugees. And this strategy, we went we rolled it out to the provinces, also to the refugees, Palestinian and the Syrian ones, and especially also to address the matter of gender and gender-based violence, especially in the host societies. And of course, these programs are included in this plan. For us, in our country, most of the refugees are outside the camps. This means also the situation in the families to develop their children, to educate their children. This is not only for us. This is also something like responding to the situation. And in Jordanian dialect, we say that we are one nation, and we'll try to recognize that they exist, that they are in our country. And 2 years ago, at the London conference, 200,000 workers were 2,000 jobs were given to refugees from Syria. Of course, most of them to men, but also Jordanians and Jordanian women, and they are also widely organized. So what we do with this national strategy is also this year, for example, we have gone to 12 provinces in Jordan. We discussed things with female refugees, and what can we do in Jordan for refugees, for Jordanian women, for their children, and so on. And so we work for implementing also the government plans in this realm, and we have a development agenda, and in connection to this also an agenda dealing with the Syrian refugees. We have our programs, and We cannot separate between the strategies for the Jordanian women or for the refugee women from Syria. And so what we have tried to do on this basis is, of course, has to be implemented on the ground. This is in the framework of the strategy for women.
We had an import saying that the suffering of women in different Arab countries might be very similar, even in countries which are not suffering from conflict, so which would need a very serious addressing from decision makers and having them incorporated in balanced plans. So the civil society in itself cannot do anything as long as there are no decision makers at the highest levels that they want to implement a national working plan and implement it on women's issues. So all the participants have enriched us with enormous inputs here. Thank you to Bushra for this comment. I'd like to ask Fayrouz. We are talking about challenges, numerous challenges, and maybe we've seen certain issues here, but the funding of the national action plans, or even the funding of national initiatives or popular initiatives to bring about change towards peace building. These challenges in times of conflict are enormous. Sometimes you find that some organizations or initiatives face challenges to convince funding sides that women should take priority over other issues such as humanitarian things. So how is the situation of funding for these initiatives? What do you mean? Funding from outside or even inside, even local funding or national funding, even from the government, funding as a whole, because we know that the UN, the international organizations, support states in their programs, and they're not only supporting civil society organization. We have priorities, and priorities for men are the war. All the strategies for women are now pending because they're being regarded as luxury additional accessories. And in the South, they have not even started implementing any actions and any strategies, and they have not earmarked anything in the budget. I don't know when this is going to happen. In North, we do not have any national plan, and the authorities think that it's not the right time because we're still in a war. For 6 years, they have been thinking that there should be a national plan being set up for the contribution of women, the participation of women in peace building. But the decision makers consider that the war has the priority. So the women are outside the area of interest. Absolutely. So that's why we find that women are so far removed also from the peace-building efforts and the decision-making centers. The outside funding from abroad, I wouldn't think that it's predominant. Even if it's happening, it's only for events which do not benefit women because they're not in decision-making positions and not implemented in the peace negotiations. Even if there are budgets earmarked for this, it's mainly going to men's interests. Have I answered your questions? Yes. Thank you very much. You have answered it sufficiently. Also in Egypt, there is a difficulty in funding initiatives because in general, funding from abroad is a challenge in Egypt. But regarding the Egyptian government earmarking parts of the budget, or even from international organizations or the UN, which might fund such initiatives, how do you see the situation in Egypt? If you receive funding from abroad in Egypt, you might be penalized with 15 years in prison. So just to give you an idea about what the situation is in Egypt. So we are under enormous pressure, particularly feminists who've been abroad, who still live abroad. We are considered spies for Western powers. So that has created a huge pressure on us, and we feel under stress. Things might be achieved when resources are available, and resources they are in a big part financial resources, but also human and technical resources. It's also knowledge that needs different forms of funding. So all over the world, the percentage of funding for things regarding women and gender issues, it's less than 2 points, be it international organizations, even when they're trying to support civil society organizations. Feminist and female issues in the world are very little funded. So there's nothing that covers all of this together and binds it together. So when we're trying to pressure and to discuss it, and from academics and from activists about the budgets, mostly people from the government or even from civil rights activists, they say, okay, no, we are much more needy. And so that's part of the essential problems which we should look at from a holistic point of view. And we should try to overcome them to different things. We're working particularly on issues such as violence and peace building. We would need services. Women still have a long way ahead. We are partly only survivors. So our resistance to the societal ideas, so we consider ourselves victims mostly. So we have to emerge from this idea of being only victims. And that's also societal responsibility. And sometimes society puts it on the burden of the state again. But it's actually a role society should be. And the government doesn't provide certain services, so society has to take it over. Also social services in the broader sense. Not talking only about providing basic needs, but in a broader sense. Civil society cannot do that on its own, but also government cannot do it on its own. Even in very developed countries where we can get fund, where feminist movements can get funding and can do what they want when they want it, they cannot only do it on themselves, they have to rely on other societal movements. I'm saying this because we're working on a daily basis with women, daily basis, and we see with our very own eyes what is happening and what they have to face, and see the services they're receiving, which are completely different from what we have in other countries. So we are really inside the society, and we can really say that there is violence on all levels. I would like to talk about the coexistence, but the society now lives about all the violence that we've lived in the kind of state of artificial silence. And it's something horrific and it's terrible. Even inside your country, you feel that you cannot really move. We still have a long way ahead. So which we cannot do on our own. Even social movements are facing this state, and then they have to deal with the governments, and they have to oppose the government. And fortunately, not all women live with violence, but still it comes back to resources, and resources need political will. There's international political will which needs to be sustainable as well, which needs to be solidary, and so we can feel, even though there are different levels of problems, but we still believe in certain things. So our role in the international communities is that they should stand behind our policies as well. That we're not going to behave according to illusionary ideas about what the values should be, and okay, now just take away the violence. So the solidarity should come through a strategic plan which we have been working on. We are capable of developing our own policies and strategies and to address our very different issues. And we're not following the stereotypes where people from other countries try to implement them on us. And the state also puts us in that corner. We are very aware. And instead of facing violence yourself only, then you face violence against yourself and those surrounding you. And that also comes back to the issue of resources. So that's something which the feminist movement all over the world should take on all over the place. We are our own masters. We do what we want to implement and not what someone else has dictated upon us.
Let me go to Dr. Salma, and when we speak about Jordan, as it is in all the other Arab countries, also in Egypt, and even the first revolution, which had its effects on the situation, all the movements, 2010, 2011, there was also a role of feminist movements for women, and also especially online in the social media, and of course also on the ground there was a voice for women, and on this basis this podium of social media, what are the positive, what are the negative effects, even either in Jordan or in other countries, for the regional level. Certainly the social media and the IT technology was very positive, and especially in the regional area, 2011 it played a basic role, but of course we see it from two aspects. There are reasons. At the beginning, when the revolution started, there were the official newspapers and official channels, TV channels and so on. They had also a certain level of political discussion. For example, in Jordan and other countries, they to a certain extent also disseminate the ideas of the civil society and so on. But all these things were special, and they did play a role for the social relations. Now, on a global level, not only at the regional level, what is said in the streets, or which is strange or not strange, everything can can be discussed, violence or anything else. This is then given to others, and it can be discussed at every level, and there can be a group of those people who are then involved or not involved, recruited or not recruited. They can, for example, also disseminate doubts, and so we have some kind of chaos now. And this has happened today when we see the role of women in social media. We see it especially on the electronic level, and especially also, or even when there are elections. When you are with the leftists, you talk about violation of law and so on. There are two different levels of discussion. That means there's the way of knowledge and of publishing knowledge. For example, now in the time of pandemic, but on the other hand, this year we had daily meetings in order to talk with people, and especially also in remote areas, and to explain the situation to hundreds of people. And for example, in Ahwar, we can be in contact with them without going there, and we can talk to them at 5 in the afternoon and so on. That means there are new prospects, but of course there's also hate speech, there are doubts and disseminated and so on, and also actions against women. We have seen that, for example, in Libya, there were rapes or there were killings, and there were killings because of because what is published in newspapers and so on, and because of this, what was published, the drawings which were published in the newspapers, where people were killed, and because of information, fake information, which was published, there's so in one part, people believe this, others do not believe this, and of course this has its effect of on young people. And so we have to raise up our efforts, especially to work with young people, especially now in this revolutionary campaign, also to foster the dialogue between both genders in the family, for example. And what is, for example, shown on YouTube, and who is following this. This is sometimes better than using TV or radio. It can be used, but we have also a technological gap, and this, considering this is important. There are girls who can now learn without going to the school, but on the other hand, perhaps they don't have an internet chip, an internet card, or because of their geographic situation, they cannot get it. So there are different aspects that have to be taken into account. Thank you, Doctor. This is some light shed on the Arab region as a whole. And of course, we have this stereotypes of women, and we have also the situation that women are targeted also. And so I have a question to Dr. Maria concerning the situation of women's rights in Lebanon, and you are not in Lebanon, but you can speak for Lebanese women. How is the situation in Lebanon concerning also the refugees there? Please give us an idea of that, and if you like, also some comment on the social media use of internet and IT for the cause of women, please.
Well, I tried to be brief. I would like to answer because I've given already examples for the... Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Are you receiving me? Yes, 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 yes. Can you hear me? Is my voice audible?
Can you raise the voice here? Can you raise the voice here?
Can you hear me now? Yes, please. Okay. I've already come up with examples either for Lebanese feminists as individuals or as organizations, and on the usual they play in a very important way. Last week there was a female Lebanese journalist which led an inquiry into a case of harassment where Syrian women are exposed to. So this is female feminist Lebanese organizations try as far as they can to cooperate, so to better understand the suffering of Syrian women and how they can provide services to them, because we can complement each other as Lebanese and Syrian organizations, because we understand as Syrian feminist organization, we have an understanding of what their context is as Syrian women, but what Lebanese women and female organization can contribute is that they better understand the infrastructure and the build-up of these Lebanese societies, so we can complement and bringing forward services. Outside official organizations, I feel that there is a huge amount of solidarity and that there is a huge interaction between female feminist Lebanese and Syrian activists regarding the digital gap. We also, in the digital area, we're also speaking about that stigmatization is also kind of violence. In Syria, we saw that women were permanently stigmatized, and that was regarded as a kind of accusation. When a man leaves a detention center, he is considered a hero, while a woman, when she leaves a detention center, she is considered by society as someone who is inculpated and accused because they have been exposed to sexual violence. So it's a kind of stigma which has been described by our colleagues, by women being described as morally unstable, as mentally unstable. So I would like to mention one last point, because you picked up on the point of funding, because that's extremely important. We have a number of initiatives which are not officially represented, and they have enormous problems of having access to funding when fighting violence and terrorism. On the way, for a certain point, that's really based on substantial judgment. But on the other hand, it sometimes has a devastating effect on the work of social organizations, and particularly feminist organizations. So it's very strange that in our region, we still do not have one single fund established particularly for women's and feminist issues. So we as feminists would have to see how can we support each other and how can we share resources so we do not depend on external funding. Thank you very much. So that's thank you for your contribution. And very briefly, I'd like to go back to Ferouz. Maybe you can tell us something briefly. What are the perspectives for implementing 1325 in Yemen and more broadly in the Arab world? In 1 or 2 minutes, please. Effective mechanisms to implement 1325. The resolution would be very excellent to commit and force governments to really implement action plans. And networking, as I had mentioned and you mentioned, that's excellent. Feminist networking, and also to force and oblige governments and states to specify 30% of decision-making positions for women. That would be excellent as well. That is an important pillar also in 1325. What all the other women have said, I would support strongly, and I'd like to thank you very much, and also the organization of Al Parliament for organizing this excellent conference. Thank you very much. Now back to Mohsen. Have you any input? One last input you would like to mention? Please, the floor is yours in less than 1 minute, then Salma, and then we're going to conclude our meeting today.
Thank you. And I thank all the organizers and for giving me the floor. And I think every decision and every tools should be practical. And when we are experiencing, for example, violence, we should stand together. And so thank you very much again. Do you have any last word? Please give it to us. Just in the last minute. Thank you. I'm sorry that I came late, but I think this meeting with the colleagues from Syria, Egypt, and Yemen is always beneficial to us, and it is always necessary that we coordinate our activities at the regional level, and especially this term of agency is very important, not only to protect women, but we know that Yemeni women play a role in negotiating many things, also abductions and so on, or in Syria, activities of women, to also at the official level. And the question is, how do we build up? How can we draw the first lines in the conflicts in other situations, and how can we together make decisions? So let us end this day, which at the beginning we have heard about the experience of women in Iraq, especially peace building there, and also the role of women in the region in general, and this was a very good basis for the next day, for tomorrow. And we have in the morning a meeting together, and we also invite you to ask more questions, and I hope that you have got also some positive impressions about the things that that are going on concerning women and also the challenges. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock Iraqi time and at 8 CET we start again with the new panel tomorrow. Once again, thank you very much, and I hope that we had a very nice day all together.